Welcome to the PortGen Good and Services track. Today is September 30th, and today we have a couple really awesome presenters. But before we get to that, let's do a little bit of housekeeping and make sure that your name is updated on your profile pic, or if you're on the phone or whatever, so that we know who we're talking to. This recording will be available probably by next week, and we will post this on the Washington PTAC, on Port of Seattle, and on SBTRC websites and resources. But if you have any questions or you want to try to track them down, just contact me. I'm Leslie Miller, and I can get you whatever you need to have. So with that, I think that we will, I'll go ahead and introduce Aisha Kadri, who is with the SBTRC, which stands for the Small Business Transportation Resource Center. And she'll say a few words, and then Aisha will introduce the Port of Seattle. I think Tina Boyd is here. So we'll leave it to Aisha.
Thank you, Leslie. Hello, everyone. My name is Aisha, and like Leslie said, I'm with the SBTRC. I help host workshops like these in collaboration with Tina Boyd from the Port of Seattle, as well as PTAC. Also run the bonding education program and support the DOT's Women in Transportation initiative. If there's anything that I can do throughout the meeting or after the meeting, just let me know. I'd love to connect you to resources in the area. And then I'm going to introduce Tina Boyd with the Port of Seattle. And then Tina, I'll let you take it from there.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tina Boyd with the Diversity and Contracting Department, Port of Seattle, and welcome you again to our Advanced PortGen Goods and Services track. I want to thank our partners, SBTRC, and I hope you are come prepared with your questions. I will pop in and out, but if you have any questions directly for me, I'll make sure I leave my email on the chat, but have a good time. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. Well, I think that we're ready to move on to our first presenter for session 1, how to sell to Washington State. And this comes from the Washington State Department of Enterprise Services. Today's presenter is Erin Lopez, and Erin is the Procurement, Inclusion, and Equity Program Manager, Leader, Director. Some of us have known Erin for a very long time. And so if you need any contact information to Erin or other resources within the Department of Enterprise Services, please connect with us and we'll get you that information. And as always, this slideshow is available for download, and I think Andrew will post this information into the chat a little bit later into the conversation. So Erin, we'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you. So yes, I'm Erin Lopez. I'm with Washington State Department of Enterprise Services, and I'm in our Contracts and Procurement Division and within our Procurement, Inclusion, and Equity Program, which is a larger team in which I am part of. So I'm going to focus on goods and services, but we do have a smaller group, so can also kind of focus a little bit more in on what's important to those that are here today, but also information that will be relevant for our recording. So I want to kind of find out who's in the room, do a little bit of introductions, talk about who Department of Enterprise Services is within the state. What do we do? What's our role? What kind of work do we have? How to approach doing business with Washington State, kind of a high level to help kind of figure out how to start accessing the state and work and where those opportunities are. I'm going to talk a little bit about state recognized business designations. So you'll hear different certifications and registrations for different agencies. Well, Washington State, we have ours as well. So I'll highlight what we look at under our statutes, and then some tips, ideas of where to start. And then as I'm going through, I'm hoping those who are monitoring the chat can let me know if there's anything in there that I'm missing, because I probably will not be reading those unless I'm in a kind of pausing. So get started on introduction. So normally I'll say, hey, raise your hand if you're doing these different industries, but I think we have a small enough group today if folks want to kind of say a little bit about what industries they're in and maybe a little bit of what you're hoping to gain today. And I guess that's actually a technology check too, if everyone has the ability to speak. Okay.
Well, I see Joe there.
I'm here. I'm here.
Joe is our Gold Star student. And actually, we'd like to hear from Joe about the industry that he's in and a little bit of background in regards to his company and maybe potentially, doing work with or for the Washington DES. So, okay, Joe, you're on.
Well, anyway, my name is Joe Saxton. I'm in technology, energy, all kinds of things. I've been in the field for a long time. So I live and work in Alaska, but getting ready to open an office and head down to Washington. I have a couple of kids going to college, so I want to get down there. So like Leslie said, I am a student. I am just learning as much as I can about this process. Last year, I've been doing small business preparation with getting the DUNS and the SBA stuff done. So very similar type of material, but slightly different, or just based on who it's for. So just trying to learn as much as I can about the people that I would do work with and for, and the places that I would do it. So I'm just learning.
Awesome, Joe. So when you say tech and energy, do you mean any like IT professional services, or do you mean IT cabling and then energy? Can you tell me a little bit?
Well, I've done a lot of oil and gas support. So for the last 10 years, I've been in Prudhoe Bay doing Conoco and Exxon and BP and doing all their operations and workforce housing services. But now I'm moved into more of the data center and airport redevelopment in San Diego. There's a couple of projects going on for some brownfield work. So my companies and partners have been down there, just kind of seeing what we can do. So like I said, just kind of learning everything I can about the different industries, because IT and technology and IoT and artificial intelligence kind of applies to everything. So to me, it's just understanding the need and seeing how the solutions can be tailored to meet those needs.
Okay, great. Joe, thanks for being a spotlight, and now you'll also be recorded. So we'll boost what you're looking for and some potential partners for those who are looking at the training. So thank you.
Thank you.
So who is DES? Who's Department of Enterprise Services? So we're this centralized operations for the state, right? So we're kind of that business unit that supports our state agencies. And we also have programs that also benefit other agencies, local municipalities, tribal government, and nonprofit. So our large areas, and we do a lot of stuff. So not even everything is on here. So we have public works. So construction, architectural, engineering services, our centralized contracts that state agencies must use if it meets their needs, and other agencies, tribal government and nonprofit may use if they would like to. We also do facilities and leasing. So when government needs land or space or a building, they let us know what they need, and we do that component of it. We do information technology contracting assistance, and we have IT contracts within our central contract portfolio. We also do what's called tech leasing. So we will purchase computer hardware and servers and kind of these large IT purchases, and then lease them to agencies so they don't have these big costs all at one time, but it's spread out over time. And then we support other small agency. We support small agencies. So that's financial and human resources solutions. We also have centralized training for the state. We have print and mail services, fleet operations, and surplus. So the surplus thing is really cool too. So if you said you're opening an office in Washington State, these are, so when the state says, hey, we don't need these cell phones, computers, trucks, desks anymore, we give them to surplus, and then surplus at a discount rate kind of auctions and gives that off to the community or other agencies and nonprofits. And so I was at a community event recently where some folks shared some really awesome deals that they got. So I think it just kind of depends on what's out there. The state doesn't typically wait until their IT breaks. And so it's usually on a cycle. So a lot of folks might say every 4 years, they'll replace all their IT equipment. And so there can be some things coming in through there. Some people might wait until it breaks, but a lot of them on a cycle because you want to avoid your IT breaking to service the community. So from a numbers perspective, what does this look like? So for goods and services, our agency oversees, again, these centralized contracts. And we have over 1,000 businesses, which we call vendors, on these contracts. And the spending on these contracts is over $1 billion a year. And that can go up above that, kind of depends on how much stuff we're buying and what's going on in the world of government. But it's over $1 billion a year on these contracts. And there's about 200 contracts in our portfolio. So there might be multiple businesses on a contract to kind of reach those numbers. Our own agency also does purchasing for our needs, and that's over $100 million a year in goods and services for our own operations. And so that includes training and our own needs. We also do, and again, those public work contracts, those construction, architectural, and engineering, and we do that in every region of the state. So we manage nearly 400 design and construction projects worth more than $290 million each year. So if you want to know where is this information, what's coming up, what might align with the work that I do, you can look at our planned procurement page. So for those centralized contracts, those big contracts, we want to make sure everyone knows what we're working on. They tend to be repeat contracts, like the state will always need office supplies. The state will always need computers. The state will always need a lot of different things. And so when it ends a new one, we want to have a new one, right? And so you'll see our project schedule. And so we'll often start a year in advance before that contract expires. And we'll publicly post our schedule. Like we're doing research, and then we're drafting, and then posting the solicitation review. And this is the schedule we intend to follow and where we're at on that. It's been a little bit of a different year. I think the last 2 years, I think we can all agree. And so there are some things that, have shifted schedules. So they might be a little bit off, but you can see where we're at. So, PPE, supplies to support the state, that wasn't in our projections. And so, workload, things change. So some of those schedules be a bit off, but you can see what we're working on and how far we are against our planned schedule. So those are regularly updated. Our own agency work, we also forecast. That does come a little faster as a program has a need. And then we have public works forecasting as well. The other nice thing is you can look at all of our contracts and see who's on them, who's using them, when they expire, who's spending how much money, what the pricing is, the last procurement that went out, how people scored. So we have that really nice data transparency at the state, and we try to make that an easier process within DES. So you don't have to make a request, but that information is available. So what kind of things are coming up? So some of the big contracts that are coming up here in the near future is our IT professional services. So this is a high use, high area of interest. Right now it's a click-through agreement, and then there is a secondary procurement process. So you get on a kind of like a pre-approved list, and then you have to submit bids. For our whole agency, we're moving away from that. We hear from the businesses, they don't like it, and we hear from our customers, they don't like it. So we're moving away from that so that you bid. And then when you're on contract, anyone can use you at any time. You don't need to do a secondary process. You just do it once. This will probably not all come out at once. It'll probably be sections because there's a lot of different elements within IT. And we are planning on putting up a website and having some meetings to kind of share where we're at in that process and how to engage in that. Another area that might be of interest that there's a lot of businesses is in professional services. So we are in the, we did just do a big professional services solicitation. The lean consulting services is another one that will be coming out. We also in the more near future are doing kind of an investigations contract and some other things that are there you can see on our site. But lean consulting is an area a lot of folks are interested in as well. And then we have a lot of kind of equipment and specialty contracts. So cabin chassis trucks is an example of something coming out, and you'll see more of those kind of product or industry specific areas for buildings and grounds, automotive, health, transportation. So things like highway marking paint and things like that. So these are some examples. That plan procurement page that I talked about, this is what that looks like. So you'll kind of see that it has the contract number, a summary title, so you can see what else coming up and just kind of skim the titles. You'll see the point of contact. You can call or email the person working on that. And then you'll see this commodity code button. And that's just basically what we intend to use for those matching codes for when the solicitation goes out. So when you register in our procurement system for those to see and respond to those opportunities. So that's our webs. I'll talk about that later. These will be the codes you'd want to use. And then that project schedule I talked about, you'll see that it says what the schedule is, what we're actually at. Again, you know, we've had some pivots. You'll see, oh, wow, okay, we're a little bit behind on that one. How much? Well, I'm going to help you see where we probably will fall for the rest of that schedule. So again, just that transparency. You can also click on, when you click on that contract, you'll also see the previous contract that it's replacing, so that all that data transparency I talked about to see who's currently on the contract, past solicitation, current pricing, that's all public. All right, so that's who DES is. That's kind of the work that we have in the goods and services area. So how do you actually do business with the state? How can you approach this work? Well, one question I hear a lot is, what does the state buy? Do they even buy what I'm selling? So one thing that I think is really cool, this is run by Office of Financial Management, but it's a tool that it basically says every check that we write, it's open to the public. You can see open checkbook, what we're buying from a cash standpoint. So you can see if your competitors there, you can see the industries, you can see how much we're spending to kind of give you an idea of where are we spending and what agencies and with what companies. The only thing that's a little bit tough in there is that if it's a credit card, it comes as US Bank. So you won't see you know, who received the payment if it was through a credit card. So, but all those checks, which are, you know, those contracts that you're paying against, you'll see that here. And so one thing that I think is of interest is to know these grants, benefits, and client services, as you can see, is a much larger number. So the goods and services, that's 4.5 billion, right? That number starts to get a lot bigger in some of those other areas. So that also helps you know how a contract might come out. Because the things that I'm talking about are goods and services procurements. It is not grants and client services. That is done differently. So another thing that's cool is you'll know what our plan is for state funds. That doesn't mean if we respond to federal funding sources and have more money that this won't be in there. But for state funds, and you want to know, hey, what's coming up? We have to ask the legislature. They say, hey, this is what you can spend money on that special project. So if you want to sell something really cool that we're not thinking about and it's a big item, we can't buy it, right? So like, if we want to do a new IT project that's not in our core operating budget, we need to ask approval to do those kinds of things. But you can see, what are the things that we need to solve? What kind of laws were passed? So do we have to do a modernization system for our IT project? You would see that. Do we have to implement different programs? You'll see that if it's with, again, state funds, not other funding sources. So just something kind of cool that you can, I know it's a lot of stuff to read into, but it does give full transparency on what we're doing. And again, that capital budget, what are we building for those in construction? Any questions before I start kind of moving into a little bit of how that procurement or access point is into the work?
No, I mean, everything makes sense. The only question I had was maybe on that lean consulting line item. What does that mean for you guys when you say lean consulting services?
Yeah, there's so many different services that have come up, and I think, through our market research process, I think we'll learn more. But when I started at the state about 6 years ago, the state was really diving into how do we do lean. So you're listening to your line staff, you're saying what's broken, how do we fix it, how do we kind of find these measurable processes and get to the root cause and kind of do check and adjust, that lean process. And we stood up a lot of work, Results Washington, and all these things around that. There is a lean conference that's coming up from the state that would probably give you the best idea of where we're at with that right now today. So we have, I know some people were monitoring the chat and putting some things in the chat. If you wouldn't mind just doing a quick Google search and saying lean conference, Washington State, we can post that in the chat, and then I'll give you some indicators as to what those current conversations are from our customers. But when we mean, I know it's confusing because lean is used in different ways, right? There's lean construction.
Yeah, because I'm actually a Lean Six Sigma. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt, so I've gone through the whole Lean and Six Sigma process, and I've gone through all the white and green, all the black belts. So I'm very familiar with that. That's why I was wondering what that was.
Yes. So if you have the black belt, absolutely, it's in that bucket. Yes. Yeah. And so, yes, the lean conference, any information that they post that's the big conference that state employees go to kind of see where are we at, where are we going? Where's the direction we're heading here? So that I think that would be a good, I don't know if it's open to the public. I'm assuming it is, but if it's not, you could still, see the agenda and other information that would give you indicators. So.
Well, it was just good to know that someone's practicing lean. So that's good to be, that was a good thing because it's about efficiency and,
Yeah.
Leslie posted a question a minute ago too. If you're up for it, I think she might need to actually articulate it. Because will DES require CMMC certification on the IT side like the federal government does? I'm not sure what those acronyms all are. So, yeah.
So Washington State must meet the requirements put in place by the Office of Cybersecurity and the Office of the Chief Information Officer. So from a structural standpoint at the state, we do the contracts and that general business operations, and then WATEC, OCIO, Office of Cybersecurity, they do all the how should the state operate from an IT perspective. So you could see their policies and their requirements and what they require for different work. So and that sets the standard to ensure that we're accessible, that we're secure from a security standpoint, and what those minimum requirements are. So we will meet the legal minimum requirements are required to do under their statutory authority. But the customers and the businesses from that market research process would determine anything outside of that. All right, so we need to hit the baseline. And then together through our market research, we'll say, is there anything else? And so it's really important in those early meetings, early engagements, requests for information, that people respond and say, I hope you do, or I hope you don't add these other elements because they're an opportunity or a barrier for small businesses. But I don't know what will be required unless it is within the policies set for the standards in those areas. So we have a lot of areas. So our standards for security may vary for, say, website versus something that has confidential information. I don't know enough to say what those standards are or what's in there, but I can certainly direct you to where they're at, and then you could read those. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it did. And also, Erin, Washington PTAC has our own in-house specialist on CMMC. And there's a series of workshops that have been past and future in regards to this. And if Joe or anybody else needs more information on that, Washington PTAC can provide that information. I think Terry has an event coming up in the next couple months, and a good overview, particularly for smaller IT companies. And anyway, it should show up on our calendar of events at washingtonptac.org. So thanks, Erin.
Yeah, and hopefully that the lead from a trainer perspective can participate in our outreach events and conversations and RFIs and other things to kind of be aware of where we're at and where businesses are at, and participate in that communication, because there is a lot of IT work at the state, and we are doing a lot of major changes. For example, One Washington will replace a lot of our procurement and financial and other systems. And so there'll be a lot of data migration work and other work that would align with that would need to happen. So being in the room for that firsthand information would be great. So techie to techie will probably understand it better than, say, a generalist like myself, and that will probably lead to better conversations. And again, hopefully we'll be sharing that information for anyone who's in webs, and it'll be on our website. So hopefully that can be boosted as well. And I'll make sure we send that to PTAC to make sure that they have that out for clients too. So if you want to sell to the state, what rules are we operating within? How do you have to do that? So within state law and policies, we have a specific structure for goods and services if you are a state agency. So for Washington state agencies, we must first look and see if there's a centralized contract. So we call those master contracts. We are going through a process to change that. There's a government process we have to follow, so that will hopefully be called primary contracts in the future. Anything that's competed, so all these centralized, these master contracts would have to be posted in webs under state law. The contract opportunities range from 0 to 120 million. So like fuel, some of those energy areas that we heard about earlier, that's closer to that 120 million. But we may have multiple awards or regions. And so not every contract has the same usage. We are always trying to make sure all contracts have usage, but some may be smaller for more specific focus within one contract. And so how do you access this information? So we showed a little bit of this earlier, that it's all publicly posted on our website. So every active contract we have in these centralized contracts, you can see along with all the data and what we're doing to work on them. We also have a data transparency site, data.wa.gov. And if you search master contract, you can look up the spending on every single one of those contracts, who's using them, which agency, and all of that information. Also, when you look in who has that contract, if you want to be a subcontractor, you'll also see all their contact information and pricing and other requirements there. So if these central contracts cannot meet an agency's need, and again, this is state agencies are required to use these contracts if they meet their needs, and other municipalities, tribal government, and nonprofits may use them. Then a state agency would then see, do they have an agency contract that will meet their needs, or does it make sense for them to do their own agency procurement? If these are competed, if they're above the direct buy limit, which is the non-compete limit, then they have to legally also be posted in webs. And we are looking at how to provide more information with our current older systems as far as, you know, what contracts are awarded when, if you're in the system for webs, you'll see those opportunities come up and who was awarded. But if you're not, and you're looking at historical data, right now, that's also that data.law.gov, and you look up agency contracts and it's posted annually. If you're in IT, there's more specific data for IT contracts. And then if you want to know more information, there's you can do a public disclosure request and reach out to the agency for a copy of the contract or more information you would want to see. Then we have what we call direct buy. That's where you could just go to who you want. There's not a master contract or an agency contract that meets your needs. Then you can do direct buy. And so that's under 30,000. You don't have to compete it. It's not posted. And then if you're a Washington small or veteran-owned business, that number goes up to 40,000. So if there's a contract associated, it still goes on that transparency website. You can see that contract. It was paid with a check. It's on the open checkbook site we talked about earlier, and you can check that out. The nice thing with competed contracts is they're all in one place. They're all in webs and you can see it. The nice thing with those direct buys, you don't have to compete, but it's decentralized. So it can be a little harder to find people. So just some things to be aware of when you're thinking about your approach with the state. Well, I know we're focusing on goods and services. I do still want to highlight how Public Works operates, because if you're in goods and services, you may be selling to a prime contractor for construction, your good or service. And so I won't go into a lot of details, but I do have one slide. So basically, if you're talking vertical construction, DES is the lead agency. Our opportunities are posted in webs. And so we do the building and maintenance for state buildings. And we also work with community colleges, so those other state and local agencies. Civil construction, we don't do. WashDOT, Washington State Department of Transportation, is the agency you want to engage with if it's civil construction. So that's your, they have buildings as well, right? That are tied in with their highway systems, ferries for the state. They also partner to maintain local roads, railroads, airports, and alternatives to driving. So you want to know kind of who to access in some of those areas. Those are kind of your two main ones for the state. Now there's also other, right? So this is your four-year universities have their own processes. There's also kind of some specialized areas like fish hatcheries and things that are specialty into those agencies. That's not your kind of general vertical building construction that others typically will lead. All right, so before I go into this, our centralized system, pretty much most agencies will have their own centralized systems. Ours is called WEBS, or Washington Electronic Business Solution. Before I dive into that, are there other questions or comments?
Yes. On the facilities, I saw that line item where it says that you guys build and maintain the facility. So is that facilities maintenance contracts that are available, or?
So we have like job order contracts. So someone comes up and says, hey, I have an issue with plumbing, or hey, I have something that falls under the public works realm. If it's considered a good or service, so like janitorial, that is not considered public works. So that would not be under, unless it's like after construction cleanup. So that would not be under that job order contract or one of the other contracting means. That would be under DES or the own agency. So we do capital campus for facilities. So we have our buildings and grounds. So anyone located on the capital campus, you go down and you're, you're looking at somebody's cleaning the Capitol building, right? Or they're doing any sort of maintenance, tree trimming, any of that on Capitol campus. That is our agency. But other agencies if it's not tied to a lease, if it's their own, most agencies have their own kind of facility operations for janitorial and window cleaning and plants. I know like our buildings and grounds buys a lot of plants and beauty bark and things like that. So those are considered goods and services contracts. So
yeah, I was thinking more like
depends on the work, yeah.
HVAC. Yeah, good.
So it's a hard thing. There's this weird gray area that's called it depends. So like if you are doing an HVAC system, like I'm going to do a procurement for HVAC and installation and all these things, that would be public works. But if you are buying something, we have a goods and services contract for HVAC. So from the product standpoint and service standpoint. So it kind of depends on if it's like, is it a public works type contract or is it deemed being more like maintenance work where it's not that same level of work. And so it's a little bit odd. So like we might have a good that's a modular building, it's a small building, we're just going to set it up, right? But if you need to do site prep and plumbing and kind of this more in-depth work, it starts kind of moving into the public work. So it's a hard one where you kind of have to go, well, based on what I do, is it in goods and services? Is it in public works? Or can it be in both? So typically things like plumbing, roofing, those more high impact, building a building, those high impact areas, those tend to be more in public works. And the others, it just kind of depends. So I don't know if that answered the question. There's not really, there's sometimes this kind of moving gray line of
yeah, it was kind of a loaded
clarity
question.
of where it sits.
Thank you.
So yeah.
So, Erin, this is Leslie. In regards to that same topic, the job order costing, the JOCs, the thing for Joe, when he brings his business to Washington State, the JOC contract holders, of which there could be up to 6 different holders across the state, 2 for the great big overall, and then 4 for the corners of the state. The reality is 90% of what they do has to be subcontracted to small business. And in that aspect, it's all about who you know. And the JOCs are very involved in recruiting small businesses. When I was Washington PTAC in Spokane, we had a series of workshops for the JOC, and as a meet and greet. So it was a really good opportunity for the small businesses to sell their little company information, whatever, to these these big contractors. And actually they're not big contractors. They are they're classified as primes, but one of them is Burton Construction out of Spokane. And, I think they have graduated from the 8A program at the SBA federal level, but historically, they run as a small business. So, lots of opportunities in the JOCs under Public Works. So if you need more information about them, we can connect you with that also.
So in the thank you, Leslie. In the construction realm, I have a counterpart, Charles Wilson, who works in our public works. And if you look at kind of our budget, our capital budget, you'll see that there is quite a bit of work that is planned to happen over the biennium. And so engaging in those public work areas. I don't have a lot of information on where things are at across the state. I have to imagine it's been quite interesting because how business operates in physical space is always changing. At least definitely in these last couple of years. So that would be a good person. Charles Wilson would be a good person to talk with. I also know WashDOT has a lot of technical assistance programs they've been boosting. Again, that's on the civil construction side, but they also do have buildings. And so that's another good engagement point. And so I think there's also, word of a lot of federal funds coming out as well. So if you're in public works, definitely a good place to check out, but I can talk on the goods and services side. And again, on for those centralized contracts, you'll see our spending and our contracts for anything in that area. And we only have about 200 contracts. So you could even just kind of skim the titles and see what types of facility contracts we have. So maintenance, repair, and operation, we have HVAC and service, we have flooring and installation, we have modular buildings for certain areas. So there's just, we have IT cabling, so you'll see some of those different ones. And then if you look on, some of the contracts or other transparency sites, you can kind of see information. And there's a central number for public disclosure for every public entity in Washington state. So if you're kind of trying to find where something's at and it's not really clear, you can always just do a public disclosure request and say, hey, so you spend money, where does this come from? Can you help me figure out who's doing this, where, what division, or some information? OMWBE and DES and other agencies are also working on really different, a lot of people are doing a lot of equity work and programs to help make that process be easier too. And I'll talk a little bit more about DES and what we're doing in our goods and services model policy. But I think just across the state, WashDOT, Washington Department of Transportation, has these huge funds and robust programs for technical assistance right now. Commerce has technical assistance, L&I has technical assistance, community-based programs, PTAC has come up in SBTRC, but there's just a lot more resources. And then from those access points, if there's interest in feedback outside of DES, OMWBE is leading model policies and is working with the governor's office for executive orders for diversity, equity, inclusion, and how we do our purchasing and procurement across the state. So there's just, now is a good time to really engage and let us know how you're doing. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I know I gave there's some gray area, it depends, and how do you access that? And so let us know how well our efforts are doing on improving that and where we can do better. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So one good central point is webs. So for state agencies, you can go in there and set up your profile and you'll see those opportunities. And then you don't have to know where they're coming from or how they're getting there. They just get to you. And I know PTAC has a bid match system that is more inclusive outside of the state. So that's a way that you maybe don't have to follow all the trails to find out where things are at. And then when we had talked about those direct buy limits, this is also, well, those direct buy opportunities are not typically posted in webs. You can register as a small business, which qualifies you for that larger threshold. So some other benefits of webs. So one, you can, as I said, you can designate as a small business, but you can also start the veteran certification process, which requires you to first go into webs. It's also another database that prime contractors can go to find you for their state inclusion plan. So in the public works that was brought up before, any contract over $1 million has an inclusion plan. And so they, in theory, should be going to the site to help reach and find folks and also share kind of upcoming networking opportunities. So if you're interested in webs, we have a great customer service team. So you can just go in and register if you want, but if you want to talk to somebody or go through it with somebody, we have this just great customer service team who's always available. They're quick to respond and always happy to help. So we have some other ways to engage too. So you can bid directly to the state or try to sell directly to the state, but you can also say, hey, I don't know if I'm ready to do all those elements. I maybe want to try a different method to engage. We have what are called authorized fulfillment partners. Some other terms in the industry that are used for this is a tier 1 program or an installer or a reseller. And so you have a direct relationship with the customer. So it's still a subcontractor, but you have a direct relationship with the customer. And so some of the contracts that are like that are flooring, managed print, computer equipment, and our MRO, which is maintenance, repair, and operations. And so on those, at any time you can kind of reach out to the awarded business on those contracts and say, hey, I can help you. I know you're going to need installers in this region. I'd love to be added as a flooring installer. And then you also have the standard subcontractor opportunities, or in the industry, you may also hear the word tier 2 program used by corporations. And so you can think of this as a manufacturer for distributor, like a pencils for office supply company and other things like that, or an IT consulting work, the W9 or a subcontractor. And so there's different ways to engage if you're saying, hey, all this state system, that's not for me right now. This might be an area to consider as well. So before I jump into the state recognized business, I'm just checking to see if there's any questions and comments, new folks that have joined on that want to say hi and who they are. Oh, thank you. We've got Charles Wilson's information in the chat. Okay, moving on then. I did see it looked like we had somebody else join us. If they wanted to say hi, welcome. So agencies recognize different designations for small and diverse businesses. So Washington State is the same. What do we recognize? So one of those Washington small businesses, Washington veteran-owned businesses, and OMWBE, or Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises, certified firms that are minority women, and combined business enterprises. So, and I have a little caveat, and it depends, right? So if there's different funding sources, there might be other certifications. So for example, WashDOT, if they receive, when they receive federal funds, there's the US DOT program, the DBE certification, also under OMWBE. So there can be other things in there, but if it's state money, state funds, these are the state programs. So how does Washington State define a Washington small business? And I think, was there a comment or question that somebody was gonna say?
No, yeah, this is Joe. Sorry.
Yeah, no,
Just wondering about, with the diversity, being in Alaska with all the Alaska Native, and I always wonder, is tribal a big thing at all for hiring or recognized for disadvantage in Washington?
So tribally owned businesses can get certified in Washington. Yes, that's the question. If it's a DBE firm, they must first be certified in their state of origin. If it is not a DBE firm, then they do not need to first, if it's one of these like MBE, they do not need to first be certified somewhere else. Going into the specificity, I can't speak for OMWBE, but just having worked with firms, there are tribally owned entities who have been certified by OMWBE. As far as is one type of ownership more valuable than another, I would say the answer for the state is we want to be inclusive of all ownership, and we have a disparity study that specifically says for Washington State, where historically the state has discriminated through disparate impact against certain businesses owned by certain race, ethnic, gender groups. And so we have a responsibility to remedy discrimination and ensure that everyone has equal access to state dollars. So there's not one firm is different than the other. And if we've disproportionately worked with a certain group, we have to make sure that we are in an equity and fair practices engaging everybody. And then the DBE, and then as far as counting goes, counting tends to be by the certification type. So if you see our OMWBE report, our report card, how is DES or any other state agency performing, that is not desegregated. So you will see, this is our number for minority women, women businesses, combined business enterprise. That's our report card. There's not a differentiation if it's a tribally owned entity, MBE, or another recognized minority group. So that looks the same. However, when it comes to the next disparity study or the next kind of evaluation within that, desegregating that information, that'll be looked at from an equity standpoint. And then that also is, and it depends, and funding. So like WashDOT has their own disparity studies under their federal funding sources, which will follow the same legal responsibilities and evaluations under the civil rights laws and the US DOT program. So that kind of answer it?
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. I don't qualify for any of those, disadvantages, but doing all the federal stuff, that's a big push. It's all the women-owned minority businesses that that can get the work really easily. So I was wondering, do I have to compete with that, or can I compete like just being able to be a business, being able to bring value versus having to be one of those that gets favoritism. So anyway, it doesn't. So I don't classify for any of those. So I was just wondering.
Yeah. So when we're talking about what I feel like I'm hearing is preference. So preference is defined as an extra point, right? Or privilege. So when I'm hearing, so marketing, outreach, additional engagement, that doesn't give you, at the end of the day, doesn't give you anything other than being aware, and it's all posted on webs, right? Yeah. So from an access standpoint, we might do more engagement in certain communities, but everyone's accessing the information from the same public places. Obviously, incumbents and people like this conversation right now, you maybe have a better idea of what's going on because we're having a conversation. But from a legal standpoint, where we are legally at the state right now is we're in a race and gender neutral environment. So our DES only has preference in our goods and services for Washington small and veteran-owned businesses. So, and what we're seeing is it is benefiting those most who've been in the system, right? So when we see Washington small are getting the most benefit as far as contract awards, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses, or we're also seeing an increase. We're not seeing the same increase for minority-owned businesses. I think that indicates we have a problem that within our institutions that we are still working on fixing and we need to fix, but that doesn't mean that we want to take from a non-diverse Washington small business and then give that to another business. What we're looking at is a whole structure in this system, right? So right now, non-Washington small and diverse businesses are getting a bulk of the work, and it's looking at those structures which then benefit everybody and then making sure that everyone's included. So for example, flooring. Before we had one big flooring contract for the whole state. How accessible is that for small and diverse businesses to have one big flooring contract for the state? It can be kind of hard, right? So when we went out the next time, we said, okay, we still have this one big open flooring contract, but we're going to have these designated awards just for Washington small and veteran businesses that are regional. So if you have a flooring company and you can service this region, you can bid against other like-sized businesses to do this work for the state. So that's what you're seeing happening right now. And we want to include everybody in an equitable way. So some other things that we're doing to kind of identify and address historical bias or incumbent preference or discrimination is we're having redacted information. So our business consulting contract or solicitation that went out with redacting any indicators of who you are, so that we just are evaluating you on your merit. So like what kind of experience, how would you solve problems, what's your background? And so if you're a fancy name that people might have a bias and say, oh, I know them, I think they're great, that's not there. It's just the information to information of how you're demonstrating that you're the best company. So we're trying to really look at the systems and the structure, so that that everybody's included, and we still have a long way to go.
That's
Erin,
great. Thank you. Thank you.
Erin, this is Marnie. Can you qualify what a Washington small business is? Just
Yes.
draw it out quick.
I do that right now. So it's under RCW. And it's self-identified in webs, but you have to attest. So when you attest something to the government, if you lie, you get in big trouble. So you have to attest in webs that you meet it annually. You have to be a Washington state enterprise. So domiciled, headquartered, incorporated in Washington, less than 50 employees, or have gross annual revenues of less than 7 million, or OMWE certified. Now, and that preference element of our legal, where we are legally, DES for our small and veteran preference, or OMWE, while that is part of the RCW, that is not part of the scoring for preference under our current legal environment, if that makes sense. So for a DES procurement for preference, it's everything but the OMW certified, because that gets out of state firms. And that doesn't create that follow within that boundary that we're operating legally in. And then veteran-owned business is also a Washington domicile business. They have to prove honorable veteran status, proof of 51% ownership or 50-50 spousal split, and proof the businesses, again, is like that Washington-owned business. You start in webs. This is for veterans and service members. And then did we have, I just wanted to, I'm gonna go over this really quick, because do we have any minority or women-owned businesses on the call today? Okay.
I don't think so, Erin.
Okay, so for the recording, I'll still do this. So this is under a different agency, the Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises. Well, actually, let me go back one more. The Department of Veteran Affairs is the only authorized agency for Washington State to certify veteran-owned businesses and service members. So while you start the process in webs, the Department of Veteran Affairs is the one who does the certification. The Office of Minority and Women's Business Enterprises is the certifying entity for minority women owned businesses and combined business enterprises. So just kind of highlighting some stuff from their website, just for those who have an interest, that you must be for profit, you must be small business, and you must be an eligible owner. And I have some of that information listed here. It's going to talk to the benefits of certification within their system and the USDOT program and other elements. I can answer questions, but since it doesn't sound like we have firms that are in this area, this is basically the same thing that's on their website, which is omwbe.wa.gov. So before I go into where to start, are there any other questions about the designation for small and diverse businesses?
Erin, I have a couple more. It's Marnie again.
Go for it.
It's more like a point out. I wanted to note that the VOB, the veteran-owned business recognition, is not size specific. It has no small component. Accurate?
Yep. There's
Awesome.
no size standard for a Washington veteran-owned business.
And then I have a question about the domicile in Washington State. I've seen several businesses, it's kind of becoming popular, where they are getting incorporated in Delaware, which has very tight rules about who can see the information on ownership, but the company is completely based here in Washington. The owner lives here, the company lives here. Is that considered domiciled in Washington, or is that an out-of-state foreign firm?
Hang on. I'm going to read the RCW and see if it tells me a nice answer for that.
Yeah,
One, be very cautious if you're bidding. Because there may be more specificity, just like OM or OMW certified is part of the RCW, but is not currently in the DES preference. You want to make sure that you read what you're responding to for a procurement so that you do not lie in that procurement, because that is not good for you. So under RCW 39.26.010, it says, it is not telling me, is it?
Line 13 says in-state business means a business that has a principal office in Washington. Principal office is not defined.
That's a great question. So, Marnie, like, thank you. I'm like, it's hard to read it and do it on a short time frame. So I'm glad that you read that and had that reference. If you could just email me, Marnie, that question and ask for a legal clarification, then I can send it to our legal services manager.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Can everyone still see where to start up on their screen? To reshare because I opened something.
Yep.
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So where to start? How does the state engage me? So from a buyers of goods and services perspective, they're first going to look at those master contracts or centralized contracts. Then they're going to see if their own agency has a contract. And only then can they do direct buy. So this is the education that we say they're supposed to follow. So as a business, where is your goods or service typically offered, right? So while I'd like to say always look and try to do master contracts with DES, is that how is what you offer on those contracts, right? So where are agencies typically buying your good or service? It's a good thing to kind of check, because then you know where to focus your efforts. Like, what next? So read about the procurement method. So once you know, okay, I'm doing those job order contracts that we heard about earlier, or I'm doing master contracts, or you know, what's that method? Kind of, you know, try to read about, okay, this is what I'm looking at doing. Engage with the individuals that are tied to that work. So is it there an outreach specialist, a small business liaison, some other state representative that I can go to kind of figure out, okay, how do I operate this, and then act. And I've called on Marnie a few times and said, okay, for when someone's starting to do this work, about how long before they're successful? And her answer typically is,
That depends.
It depends on their background experience and the amount of help they're getting, but it can be up to 2 years or more, right? So it can take some time. So if you already have that background going into it and those tools and resources going into, sure, it might be your first one that you bid, but a lot of times it's a learning process. And so kind of acting within that process and saying, okay, let's give it a shot, and kind of, you know, having that business strategy of how you think based on where you're starting, how that's going to work, right? And that check and adjust and kind of assess, how did that go? What were the results? How was my price compared to others? And that kind of that reassessment helps you kind of see and pivot. Like, am I really close and I can just refine things? Or gosh, are people just having different pricing structures or things that just really aren't aligning with my business model? And then if it seems to be working, kind of just repeat, right? And it's that practice. Some other tips to kind of align with the business is really assessing and being honest with where you are in your business growth. So cash, time, things like that. Is now a good time to resource into the time and cost to bid? Is it outreach and direct buy? Is that perfect? You get a big contract, you know, what's the cash flow going to look like to perform on that cash flow? Do you have the answers to that? And really kind of determining and finding that right strategy that fits with your business, kind of based on some of the other things above for today. Right. So that you are in place to do the next phase and the next size tomorrow. Consider highlighting who your A, B, and C customers are. The reason why I say this is a lot of times people see like $5 billion a year and I want to sell to the state. if you need cash in your business within the next 45 days, we might be a tough customer to hit that. And if there's, kind of looking at the cadence of when the opportunities are coming up and all of those things, really kind of knowing who are going to be those sweet spots that are going to help you kind of grow your business and where do you want to develop new work. And just, I love it when doing business with the state is a good experience. It's really hard when going through the process impacts people and maybe was more of an impact than their business was ready for at that point of time. Consider developing a bid, no bid plan. So if you want to respond to solicitations. And so this is actually something I learned from one of the PTAC professionals who did bidding, but it's also something I heard on the national industry from kind of those who are bidding to government contracts and really figuring out, what is that right fit for your business where you're going to be successful and your resources are going to come out really well. And then what are some of those things that are indicators to you that it's not as aligned with what you would like to focus on and where you're feeling your strengths are. And then just kind of a question out to the audience, like hey, is what we're doing working? Is this is your government. So if you're in Washington State, if you reside in Washington, we are your government operating for you. Is it working for you? So engage with us formally or informally. If you bid and are not selected, please participate in the debrief process. So PTAC can help kind of explain what that is for each agency and how to do that, but that'll help you kind of have that conversation and learn for the next one. If you decide not to bid and you've looked at it, please do tell us why so we can do better. So it's one thing to say, hey, I don't know why nobody bid. It's another thing to say, people specifically told me because I required a physical location in every region of the state, or I had some licensing or certification requirement that's not typically needed in the industry. And then, hey, you never know, they might also change that and so that you can bid later. So we've had a couple of those where somebody says, hey, I'm not going to bid because of this. And we'll tell us submit as a Q&A. Maybe we can change it as an amendment to the process. And we do that. So it kind of depends on what it is. But we do make changes. And then some other ways to let us know how we can do better is there is a draft supplier diversity policy. Okay, and this again is that same legal framework for Washington small and veteran businesses, right? Give us feedback through the end of October. That's on our website. Look at it, or if you don't want to read through it and you just want to email us, like, hey, this for me to want to work with you, these things need to be in place. This is again for goods and services, not construction. We have a business diversity advisory group. And so that represents different ownership, industries, geographic regions, size of business. And we have 22 members from across the state, and we meet monthly and talk about how we're doing and what we can do better. Our publicly focused meeting and listening session is in October, next month. Tomorrow, it's October, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So if you want to kind of share with the advisory group members what you hope they'll advocate for you or clarify for you. As I shared earlier when we were kind of talking, is that DES is not, Department of Enterprise Services is not the only agency really looking at how we can improve how we service our residents. And so OMWBE has been leading feedback from the executive order for diversity, equity, and inclusion and supplier diversity. We're having more community-based kind of service offering and ensuring things are happening. And so let us know how we're doing or your fears. If you think you're afraid our programs are going to negatively impact you, have those conversations with us. And you can also, if you're like, hey, that is way too much stuff happening, I got to run my business. You can also share it with a community partner, like the ones that are on here today, and say, hey, I don't have time to participate in this, but when you have their ear, it'd be great if you can tell them this. And that sends us over to my last slide, which is our contact information. So for, again, the Public Works, Architectural and Engineering is the Public Works Facilities and Leasing. contact, contracts and procurement, that general line, web's customer service, and the enterprise policy. So you get feedback on that policy. And I think that one of the great reasons to kind of work with webs and kind of come in too is they quick customer service and come back and make sure you get directed to the right person and responded to really quickly. Our worlds have changed quite a bit. I used to have a much smaller number of emails per day, for example, and I have about 400 a day now. And so that just ensures that if you have something that's time sensitive that you need a response to right now, somebody can kind of internally ping somebody in our kind of Zoom call and say, hey, we have an emergency. Can you get back to this person on something? And just ensures you have that quality of customer service that's important to us. So we have about 10 more minutes or so of questions. And so just really want to, I'll leave this out for a little bit and then I'll bring down my screen so we can see each other's faces a little bit larger.
So thank you, Erin. Actually, while you were talking, Andrew posted, all of those resources, especially right at the end. And so one of the recommendations when you're doing a Zoom is to always save the chat. And that's easy to do. If you click down where it says chat, and then on the very last section of the chat, there's a little ... on the bottom right-hand side. You can save the chat that way, or you can actually grab everything that's in there, do a Control-A, and then copy it with a Control-C, and then you can paste it into a notepad or Microsoft Word, or some of us use OneNote to keep track of all of our meetings. So anyway, just some little shortcuts for you. And I think your presentation was really such an excellent overview of absolutely everything. And I would greatly recommend that, all participants visit the event calendar at DES and see what kind of upcoming classes or, training sessions there are. And the thing about Washington PTAC, we don't ever charge for any of our events. And is that the same true for DES, Erin?
So right now we're in kind of a weird environment. So we are always pivoting with different events and participate typically with other entities. We did have some DES hosted events, but with the start-stop, our primary business is not events. So we've been really participating with others. So we do about 50 to 100 events that we participate in a year. And anyone who wants us to come speak, we're there. So I think really it's more of just hearing for folks what they're interested in. And if they prefer working with a group, we speak with chambers and all kinds of different associations and organizations. And so if there's an interest, just let us know. If there's a certain topic, we're happy to teach on that. But we have been doing less DES hosted and working with those like the PTAC and SBTRC and other people who do regular events and event facilitation, because we find that it just goes a lot better, especially since you have kind of a closer beat to what the trends are as far as physical and virtual space and how to work within that. But that being said, we do have some community focused meetings like we had our policy workshop on our draft supplier diversity policy. We have that upcoming October listening session from small and diverse businesses for our advisory group members who want to ensure it's not just their voice, but the broader Washington small and diverse business community voices that they're keeping in mind and what's important to them. And so we're doing more things like that. And then just tailoring like today for the interest of those who want us to engage.
Well, thank you, Erin. And keep an eye on Washington PTAC and SBTRC, Port of Seattle, because we are always advertising opportunities. So check out our local calendars and see if there's a class in a time frame that will fit your schedule. And we're kind of in the same boat as everybody else in government. We're virtual for a very long time. So we'll just see where this takes us. Someday, maybe we'll get back to in-person meetings, but for now, we'll be virtual. So if there's no more questions, then I think that, again, we'd like to thank Erin and the Department of Enterprise Services for being part of our event today. We really appreciate your support. But I think that we'll probably take a little break here, get a cup of coffee, or take a little walk out the door for a minute. So we are scheduled to be back again at 2:35 for the next session. And that session is Mr. Matthew Rhinehart from Mast Point. And he's going to tell you everything you need to know about how to put together a winning proposal. So with that, we'll go ahead and
Leslie, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think Marnie had her hand raised for a moment, but she put it back down. So just wanted to double check before we sign off if Marnie had a question or.
I just wanted to comment that in our virtual world, in our modern world, there are social media out there. So there's Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of these agencies have those as well. And PTAC does as well. So we post information. It's not uncommon to have Erin say, hey, I found this solicitation. Can you share it with your team? And we'll post it out through our social media, on our website blog, and through our newsletters. So there's lots of ways to get information, but make sure that you're following the people that you're interested in, just to stay on top of what's going on with those agencies, those primes, other partners. That's all part of that social discussion, especially when we can't be near each other. It's the social media you got to pay attention to as well.
So, and DES does have a Twitter, LinkedIn. We have kind of our news outlets you can sign up for, and other agencies have that too. I actually sign up for some of the other agencies, so I'm kind of staying in what's going on in the circle. So when you hear me say, oh, I can talk to this, it's because I got on their listserv and read their stuff as well. So most agencies have some sort of listserv to kind of know what's going on in their world, and most of them give you an option of the frequency of receiving those. So that's a great idea, Marnie. I love that.
Well, thanks, Marnie, and thanks, Erin. So this afternoon, we have Mr. Matthew Rhinehart here, and Matthew is the principal at Mast Point LLC, and you're going to learn a lot today in regards to how to develop a winning proposal. So let's move on to Mr. Matthew Rhinehart. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Glad to be here. Happy afternoon, everybody, and let's jump right in here. So as we go along, proposals is you can spend weeks, months, talking about proposals. So it's a good challenge to boil it down into meaningful things that are over an hour here. So feel free to type some questions in the chat box as we go along, or interrupt me, raise your hand, and I'll go ahead and address those as best we can. So what I've found from doing proposals over the years is that I've worked on hundreds, probably, I think the last time I counted was like 1,500 proposals, roughly large ones that I've worked on. And throughout all that, the whole process, I've found that there are three key things that I do, that I've done in the past that really make a successful proposal. And these always bubble up. And this process has worked for like a 6-month, 40-person team for proposals, and for a 1-person, 2-week proposal or 1-week proposal turnaround. It all scales. So everything I'm talking about today will scale well for a small business, large business, however size of your company is theirs. And it boils down to these three things. You got to start it right. Start it right away. As soon as the RFP comes out, you got to jump on it and start working, because there's so many things that you don't start it right that go wrong later on. Design your response. So you think of your proposal as a product. It's not just answering the mail. It's not just trying to respond to the questions that you really want to design this, because this is a sales document that sells you and your company. And then you need to plan your delivery. There is nothing worse than the wasted time of working on a proposal and then being late and not even being considered for that effort. And so we'll talk about what planning and delivery means. And so today, these are the three things we're going to talk about in detail. And so a quick note about me is I help businesses develop winning proposals and not worry if they left money on the table. I'm all about starting a proposal correctly and starting it early, as soon as the RFP is released. And you can see from my track record here that I have a good experience doing this. 20 years with proposals in general. I led a proposal center of excellence, and this started, I did a number of proposals. We did some proposals that were really not good. We had a very large one that for the Canadian government that we ended up being non-compliant on. And after that, I volunteered. Yeah, crazy. Who volunteers to run a proposal group? I volunteered to set it up so that we could actually do proposals better. And throughout that learning process, of which I'm going to impart some of that to you today, is the lessons learned from all of that. And while I ran that proposal center of excellence, we increased our win ratio by 25%. So over 50% of our competitive bids we won. We spent less money doing those bids. And so that was a 10% reduction in what we spent just doing the bids. And then most importantly, we put out better proposals. And that's all came into winning more business. So now let's talk about starting it right and what this means. So in order to start it right, we have to understand what's in an RFP, and a request for proposal or a request for quote. They all have similar pieces. They all have a scope of work, and this is the actual piece of work that you're bidding on. They all have some sort of instructions. How are you responding to this? What do you need to provide back so that the customer or DES in this case can respond to or to evaluate your proposal? What do they want from you? How are they going to evaluate those proposals then? What's the evaluation criteria? And then there's always some terms and conditions. So those 4 pieces are in every request for proposal. And if they aren't, ask for them. If you get a RFP and there isn't an evaluation criteria, for instance, call up the contracting officer and say, well, how are you going to evaluate these? Is it lowest price? Is it best value? And sometimes they have criteria, sometimes they don't. Maybe it's just best value overall. And every RFP is different. Every RFP is unique. They all have their own nuances to them, but they all have these 4 pieces to them. I've responded to an email RFP and it had all of these pieces in them. So as you go through, think about these because it becomes important as we design our response. So start it right really boils down to 3 key elements. You read and digest all of the documentation that's provided, then decide if you're going to bid this effort or not. You have to really go through and make that formal decision. And then you need to develop a schedule. These are 3 very, very key things. As soon as the RFP comes out, do this. Do these 3 things. Read it, digest it, make a formal decision that you're going to bid it or not going to bid it, and then develop a very simple schedule. These should really take place very quickly. The first day you get it, or within 2 days, you should have these 2 things completed of the overall proposal. So if you have a month to do your proposal, this should be done by the 2nd day after the RFP comes out. So reading the documentation, every proposal is different, as I said. So there could be maybe a page or 2, maybe there's 10 pages, maybe there's 50 pages. Print it all out. I prefer to print it, have it next to me, sit down, find a comfy chair, some coffee, get a red pen and a highlighter, and read through everything. What I typically do is skim through it first just to understand and make sure there isn't something hidden. And sometimes, and there's a recent one that I worked on where inside of a Word doc, they had 4 other documents that were embedded. And so I wouldn't have caught those if I didn't print out and do this piece right away. And there was some very critical information in those 4 documents. This is painful, and to sit down and read everything, it is, but it's excruciatingly important to do this. Highlight any lines that you don't understand. So like I said, I like to skim through it first, and then I reread everything, maybe 2 times, 3 times if I need to. Highlight, red pen, anything that doesn't make sense to me or anything that I need to ask questions on. And I go through all that. And if while I'm reading it, I can find the answers to that, great. If not, then I compile a list of questions. When I go after that, I ask the questions of the contracting officer. So some RFPs have a formal way to ask questions, some don't. I prefer to call and ask the questions, and then maybe the contracting officer requests that you submit them in writing as well. But when you do that, when you call, you set up that rapport with the contracting officer. It's very nice to build that rapport as you go along. But as you read it, you find questions or things you don't understand, ask those questions. Get that out right away, because you don't want to ask a question, at 2 days before you have to deliver it, if there's something that wouldn't work. And when you ask the questions, if they're formal, don't use your company name, don't have anything about your solution, just ask the question very simply. Oftentimes, the questions have to go to all the bidders, and you don't want to tip your hand that there's something that you've said, or there's something about you that could tip your hand to your competitors. When I ask questions, I like to make them very, very simple for the contracting officer to answer. I prefer yes or no questions. It's very easy to do that way for them to answer those questions. Otherwise, if you make it difficult, they're less inclined to answer quickly. One of the themes you'll see throughout this talk is how do you make it easier for the contracting officer to evaluate your proposal? Asking questions very easily is one of those ways. And as you're going through and asking questions, pay particular attention to anything in there that might be tricky for you to perform, any issues, any thoughts. I had one particularly large proposal that I was doing for the Canadian government. And as part of that, there was a clause where the team had to have a certain level of experience. And we went down a whole teaming process with that. But it was the bidder versus the bid team had to have that experience. And as a result of that, we ended up being non-compliant because my company didn't have that experience. People on the bid team did. So as you're reading it, you really want to pay close attention to the nuances, little things like that may trip you up later on. And we'll talk some more about those as we go into it too. But be very clear that all the little nuances, all those little details matter when you're reading it. So sit down, print out all the documentation, read it, highlight anything you don't understand. So the next piece of this, of starting it right, is deciding if you even want to bid this. It's sometimes called a bid, no bid, or a go, no go decision. So you've read all the documentation. You now know what this entails. You've asked questions of the contracting officer and gotten your answers if you've needed them. And now you need to decide if you still want to bid this effort. Maybe it's an easy yes, but there's two main questions that I ask myself every time when I do a bid, no bid. It's, do I want to bid this? And can I bid this? Do I want to bid this? Does it fit with your strengths? Does it fit with the core business? It's something you can do. Like I do proposals. I'm not going to bid on nuclear Zambonis. That just wouldn't fit with what I do. Do you know the customer? Do you have a good rapport with them? Because it makes it easier to win something if you know the customer. Is there an incumbent? If there is an incumbent for this effort, it's going to be difficult for you to break in. An incumbent will win 70% of the time. And that's statistics and been my experience directly too. For an incumbent to be displaced, they have to have a technical issue or be very expensive. And even with those, they will still win most of the time. Can you make a profit? Is this something you can be profitable at? And so you ask yourself is, do you want to bid it? And if you say yes, then you have to ask yourself, can you bid this? Do you have the resources to put together a winning proposal? Do you fully understand everything you need to deliver for this, for the RFP? And if you win, and this is really important, especially for small businesses, can you deliver the final product or service that you're bidding on? And if you can't, if you have a huge backlog, if you're overstressed or you're losing people, you may want to think about not bidding it, because there's nothing worse than winning something and not being able to execute on it. That is very crushing, especially to small businesses. So make sure that you can execute on it. And so if you say, yes, you want to bid it? And yes, you can bid it, then you should probably bid it. And there are times, obviously, where you'd want to bid, or maybe not, obviously, where you'd want to bid even though you say no to something that maybe it's strategic, maybe you're trying to get to know a customer better, or the customer, the client, or DES. You want to understand them better. So you're bidding on something you know you're not going to win, but you're endearing yourself to the contracting officer for this particular effort to win a follow-on. This particular effort that I bid on, I'm going to use this example throughout. This Canadian effort, it was for a ship program up in Canada. We were non-compliant on that first bid, but we endeared ourselves to that customer. And we learned a lot. And then we bid the follow-on efforts to that. We won because we used all the lessons learned of our first proposal to make the second one better. So you've decided to bid. You've read all the documentation. You've decided that you want to bid it and you can bid it. The very next thing you need to do is build a schedule. And it's critical to do this upfront right away too, because you need to understand what kind of a time commitment you need to have. Do you need to bring in extra people? Do you need to move some other things around? And if you wait later on in the proposal process, it invariably causes issues. There's stress and constraints that you're going to have. Again, especially as a small business, it's important to really be mindful of your schedule. And this goes back to the bid, no bid. You don't have unlimited time. So saying no to things that are more on the edge of what you can do versus really going after the ones you want to win and need to win is really important to manage your time as a small business. So when you're building the schedule, start from the delivery date and work backwards. Always do it that way. So if it's due on the 29th of October, plug that date in and then work backwards. What you want to do is give yourself some time. So if it's due, then give yourself a day or so to deliver it. And this forces you to take a look at, how do I deliver it? Where is it? Do I have to email it? Can I email the day of? Do I have to FedEx it? Do I have to hand deliver it? So you think about how you're going to deliver it. Then add in some time for reviews. Give yourself a day or two to do a final flip through or final review. Make sure you got a little bit of time there for rework. There's always something that comes up at the end. So now you've backed up 2 or 3 days. Then you add in all the deliverables. What do you have to deliver for this? You have to list, and maybe you need to have a company overview. Maybe you need to have a technical volume. Maybe you have to have pricing. If you have pricing, you need to back in some time for your suppliers to give you quotes. How much time do they typically need? Do you need to give them 2 weeks? You need to give them a week? Put all that time in now. The sooner you can get your supply chain working on getting quotes, the better pricing you're going to get. One of the old quotes that you probably heard that we had was, if you want it bad, you're going to get it bad. So if this particular effort is lowest price and you give your supply chain a day to give you a response, you are not going to have the lowest price. So get your schedule lined up so that you can get your quotes out early and negotiate and get more time so you can get a lower price. Again, why it's very important to get your schedule lined up first. If you get all of the deliverables listed in your schedule, then you know it just almost becomes a checklist at the end too. I've got to do a cover letter, I've got to do a company overview, and then you can make sure you've got all those in your schedule. And invariably, when I put the schedule together, there's always less time than what I thought I had. I've got a month, that's plenty of time. And then you build the schedule backwards and you realize, like, well, I've got to get all my quotes out in 2 days. Otherwise, I'm not going to have enough time to give my supply chain time to get that out. And it's a very, very eye-opening process to go through this. And when you do your schedule, you don't have to have Project or Primavera. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. I love Excel. Excel spreadsheet is great. You can use a whiteboard with one of those schedule whiteboards with the dates on it. You can use sticky notes. I've used sticky notes very effectively for small ones. The medium doesn't matter. What matters is that you sit down and plan your schedule from the delivery date backwards. It's critical. So now you've got a schedule. So what we've said at this point is we've read everything. We understand. We've gotten our questions answered. We're going to bid it, and we have a schedule. Not until then do you start actually designing your response. I've been in proposals that I didn't lead in the past where it was like a 100-page RFQ or RFP. They handed it to everybody, the kickoff meeting, and we were like a week after the RFP came out. And the project manager says, okay, here it is. You guys know what you need to do, go. And that was like the extent of the direction. And it was chaos, and we didn't win that one. So spending the time up front to actually do the work is very important, all this planning. So for designing your response, there's, again, 3 pieces that you break this down into. You develop outlines for all your deliverables. You do bullet points on each piece. You don't just start writing the piece. If you have to do a company overview, you do bullet points of what you want to say. And then you go back and you convert all your bullet points into actual writing. And this is What I've found in my experience, the best way to do this, it saves the most time from rework, because if you write, maybe you write something you don't need to write, or you copy and paste something in from someplace else, and then you have to edit it down. That invariably takes longer than just doing the design process up front. And this is, of course, the longest leg in the proposal development piece, is the writing of the pieces. And so building the outlines. So we've got the proposal instructions, and typically these will say you need to have a company overview, you need to have a technical volume, or whatever it might be for this particular proposal. And then they will give you some instructions on your company overview has to include a history of your company. How many ships have you built in the last 10 years? What's the complexity of those? What's your staff? What's your, they'll have some questions about that. Same thing with the technical volume. Describe your approach, describe your electrical solution, your mechanical solution, what have you. So you build your outline and you use exactly what they say. So as we're doing this, you want to make it easy for DES or your customer, whoever that might be, to evaluate your proposal. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to follow their outline exactly. If they give you a list of things in the proposal instructions, that goes verbatim into your outline, your response outline. But not everything is in the proposal instructions. Sometimes in the evaluation criteria, there are other pieces that you have to have. In one proposal I worked on, we had to describe our electrical overview, mechanical overview, and then our system engineering solution. But in the evaluation criteria, they were rated high what your thermal performance was for this system. And it wasn't described in the proposal outlines. So we added that under the mechanical section, we added a piece that was the thermal performance, the thermal analysis. And had we not looked at the evaluation criteria at the beginning, we would have missed that. And maybe would have been evaluated okay, maybe we wouldn't. But we ended up winning that effort because thermal was so important to our customer. And sometimes you have to look at the statement of work for an overview. If they want to describe your solution, they've described it in the statement of work, and then you use that to help build your outline. Again, you're making it easier for your customer to evaluate your proposal. This Canadian effort that we did for this Canadian shipbuilding one, we did not follow their format. We had this whole, we're going to tell the story. We did our format in our order. We were non-compliant, and it was a commander, a Navy commander, who was evaluating us. And he said, I had my people read your proposal, all 500 pages, 3 times to make sure we didn't miss anything. And I could see, because this was an in-person debrief we had, I could see the look of frustration in his eyes that he had to have his people read our proposal 3 times because he couldn't find it. And so following their order is very, very important. So after you've got your outline for all the different documents, say it's 2 documents in this hypothetical example. Now you've got your outline. What you do is you want to go in and write your bullet points for each of these responses. And so using the criteria from the proposal instructions and the evaluation criteria, and you see a little example here on the history of shipbuilding. We're going to describe our company's history. We're going to talk about when we were formed, when we merged with the hypothetical company Dockside Martin. We're going to talk about investments we've made, and this is all pieces that are in the that we're trying to sell. And as you're going through this, I'm thinking, what I think as a proposal manager is, how can I sell myself? How can I win this section? What do I need to put in here? And in the evaluation criteria, on time and on budget metrics are important. So I'm going to put a plug in here about our on time metrics. Maybe I'll put a graph in. One of the things that I've found, and this is, you can read this in literature in different the psychology of writing, is that if you have a picture or a graphic 1 every 2 pages, it breaks up the visual content of the pages. It makes it easier to read. And so I recommend you have a picture or graphic every 2 pages, and that can be a bulleted list as well as a graphic. Some of the purists will say you should be able to tell the whole story of your proposal with your pictures only. That's really difficult to achieve, but it's I definitely would applaud it if everybody would try that one. But it is tricky. But graphics, tell the point. A picture's worth 1,000 words. Can you show your shipbuilding in a graph or the picture instead of just with words? sell it a little bit more. Remember, this is a sales document selling you. And then review your bullets against the proposal instructions and make sure that your bullets correct and address everything. Now, again, we haven't written a word of our response yet. We've done bullet points and we've done outlines. We haven't sat down and started cranking them out. We should have had two reviews of things before we get here. One other point is if you're making claims, data is really important. How can you back up your claims with data? We're going to talk about that in just a couple of slides too. So as you're doing your bullet points, think about what data, what metrics you need. And if you do this early on, you can either go and find it out yourself or have somebody go and find it if you have a bigger team and start getting those metrics and those graphics being worked on early as opposed to trying to rush them at the end. So now we've got the bulleted points for our section. You can either do it section by section if it's just you writing the proposal, or you can assign sections out to different people. You know, Andrew's going to write, section 3, and I'm going to write section 2, and Leslie's going to write section 6, and then you can integrate them after the fact, and that's fine too. But take your bullet points, and now you convert them. You actually sit down and do the writing of those bullets. You're going to be more concise. You're going to be more focused on what you actually need to write instead of meandering. Your text will be tighter, and you're going to be focusing on selling and winning points right up front. This is also really, really helpful if you have a proposal that has a page count limitation. I had one that was 10 pages. This is probably the tightest one. That was 10 pages, and we had to describe a very significant effort. This was an Army proposal. And using this process, we were able to fit it very cleanly inside of 10 pages. And obviously you had to cut some stuff up, but not as much as I had to in proposals where I had a greater page count, but I didn't do this process. So this is a very good way to do it. And as you're writing, remember, add in your facts, your numbers, your graphs, sell the benefits of your solution, not just the features. And then in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about that. But remember, there's the so what. So if you're selling this to DES, it's a so what to them. You've got something great, but what's in it for them? And make sure that you're selling that in your proposal for this. And you can see at the bottom, here's an example of, you take the bullet points and then you convert it into 2 pages. And on the one page, there's a graphic or some sort of a picture of some sort that sells this section. So features versus benefits. The feature is the physical trait of the product or service that you're offering. The benefit is what the customer gains. So the example, I love the Subaru Impreza. It has all-wheel drive. That's the feature. That's the so what. And so, but it has excellent traction in snow, which is the benefit. Or the benefit could be it has excellent cornering because of the all-wheel drive. And so you're selling the benefit of that, not the feature. And if you add in facts to it or some supporting data, it becomes that last line there. The survey rated it the best car for safety in snow because of the revolutionary all-wheel drive. And so as you're writing your proposals, how can you sell yourself with those facts? The facts are so much, it matters. So for instance, the one proposal we were working on, one of the engineering managers wrote that he had a seasoned group of engineers that were working on this. And I said, that's great, but what does seasoned mean? And so he went back and pulled the data, and it was the average tenure of his engineers was 18 years. And so you write that in, that carries a lot more weight to say the team working on this has an average of 18-year tenure with the company. That you've got some solid experience there on your side. So think about how do you put those in for your company, your individual, how you're selling your proposal for your company. And so if we talk about, so we've written the proposal, we've got all the writing pieces in there. We got to plan our delivery now. But part of the delivery is the reviewing. And so when you're assembling it all together, you've got all the different documents, all the different components. You want to review it all. I like to do a printout and a full review of everything. Again, same way I started it, print everything out, markers, highlighters, review everything. And for reviewing it, well, we'll talk about the reviewing here in just a second. Then you want to verify everything. Verify that, and it's different than reviewing. Verifying is making sure you didn't miss anything and making sure that you're addressing everything in the proposal instructions, and then making sure that you deliver it on time. As part of our schedule at the beginning, remember we built in that extra day to deliver it, and then we had an extra day just to print out and review everything and make sure that we had it. So that should all have been built into your schedule already. So the reviewing it, we should have had reviews as we go along. Review it as we go along. Review the outlines after you do them. And it's important from a review perspective, to have somebody else review it, not just yourself, because you can, if you're too close to something, you can miss it. If somebody who's familiar with it, but not intimate with your section is really good. Review the outlines, review the bullet points after you do it. And then after you've completed your writing, review that. I found you can review it in sections on larger proposals. Where I've managed it is that individual people would do their bullet points, bring them back to me. I would review them all individually. And then when you compile it all together, print it out and do one more big review there. At the very end, if you're familiar with the very formal processes, there's a thing called a red team. And that's where you have someone come in who's not familiar with it at all. And you give them a quick overview and you have them read your proposal as if they are the customer reading it the first time. PTAC, I've found, the PTAC folks are excellent at this, at pulling them in and reviewing your particular component. So if you have a proposal for DES, have PTAC and you have a PTAC council you're working with, ask them if they have time to be able to do this type of review on your proposal, and see if there's anything you missed, or with fresh eyes to something not read quite right. And when you review, there's part of this review is the spelling and the grammar, and then it's the voice and active voice versus passive voice. There's so many things we could talk about here. If you don't have a Strunken White book, I highly recommend it. I've got one right here. That's Proposal Guy. You got to have those things. But having something like that where you review those off, and then all the requirements for the individual pieces. Make sure the page count. Review that you're addressing everything in the scope of work and all of that. Maybe there's page count. Page count is a very big thing. There was one large proposal I was working on that had a page count. It was 100 pages. And when we look back at the requirements, we saw that we had to have 6 printed copies, and they all had to have a separate number, copy 1, copy 2, copy 3 at the bottom, which we had missed. And when we added that in during our review, it changed the margins, which then changed the page count, which caused this whole ripple effect. And on this particular proposal, we didn't have as much time. We had to print it that day. We ended up being 10 pages over our page count. And what they did was they ripped off the last 10 pages, which was our compliance matrix. And then we were non-compliant because we didn't have a compliance matrix because we were over the page count. So you can see how all these things have a ripple effect, which is why having extra time at the end for the review is so critically important. So verification. So you've reviewed all the documents, and now part of this is to go back and you're verifying that you met everything as part of the proposal instructions, and then verifying that you addressed everything in the evaluation criteria. And you're going through and checking everything again against all that. Are all the documents complete? Did you sign everything in the proper ink color? Are your margins correct? Are your font sizes correct? I've had ones that have been very, very specific with what they're asking for. Ink color blue. One's WashDOT, for instance, loves blue ink for all their signatures. So make sure you use blue ink, scan them in color so they can see the blue ink in there if you have to submit it. For the evaluation criteria, did you address everything? And what I've done in the past even is I've done an evaluation of our proposal in their format, and I've submitted it with it. Now you could say it's a little bit arrogant, but my point was I was trying to help them that say, we want to evaluate this piece, and I pointed them right at the section in our document and said, you want to talk about our thermal management? That's on our technical volume section 3.8, which is our whole thermal management. And it's making it easy for them to evaluate your proposal, but it also evaluates you and sees it if there's anything that you have a gap in at the very end here. And because you have a little time, maybe you can go in and address something. If you have this extra couple of days and you miss something, this is how you pick it up and how you make sure that you've addressed everything appropriately. The one point here that the supporting points with data, again, if you have a little extra time at the end and you're doing your final review, can you spruce up something? Can you add in some data? Can you add in some facts that will sell it even more? And this is important when you're reviewing the evaluation criteria, that maybe you don't think you're gonna be evaluated as well at something. You can go back and change a couple of sentences or add in something that would give you a little bit of a higher score on that evaluation section. So now, delivering it on time. Delivered it exactly as they requested. So for instance, if they want an email and they have to have a certain header, or they have to have a certain format that they want, or something included in your email, make sure that's all included here, that you do it appropriately. Leave enough time to deliver. There's horror stories of this one. This one in Canada that we had, the shipbuilding one, there were 3 competitors. One competitor, this was a 3-month proposal that we worked on. Again, 500-page response. And the one of our competitors was 2 hours late delivering it, and they were non-compliant. So they spent 3 months of at least 20 people, as my guess, on their team wasted. And this ended up being just under an $80 million program when it was all said and done. Leave extra time, air travel. There was one proposal I worked on. It was we had to have 4 copies, I believe, of it. We FedExed it, but it was in the wintertime, worried about snow. We printed out a second copy of all of everything, and we put somebody on a plane that night. And we did a dual path where we sent it FedEx and we hand delivered a copy just to make sure that it got there in time. I do not recommend that. Plan ahead a little bit more than we did on that one. But the point of that is you want to make sure that you get it there on time. Sometimes people ask questions about, should we deliver it early? I wouldn't deliver it or not more than a day early. If you're done and it's like a week beforehand, I would not deliver it early. I've also had experiences where there is somebody who is ethically challenged, we shall say, on the customer side, and they've leaked information to our competitors. Now that was a completely different organization, but I'm still against delivering it very, very early, no more than a day early. And it gives you a little extra time too if something does come up, but get it there. They're on time. There's nothing worse than not getting it there on time. And don't count on FedEx as a receipt. You says that it was delivered. There was another proposal that I was working on. One of our competitors had it FedExed, and they saw that it was delivered. It was delivered to the mailroom. Took a day for the mailroom to get it up to the contracting officer. They were deemed non-compliant, and the contracting officer said it had to be in my hand by 2 p.m. Eastern time on whichever day it was, and it was in the mailroom. And so if you have that situation and it says it's delivered, call up the contracting officer and say, hey, it's there. Can you verify? And I always like to get an email receipt that they received it. And it just takes it all. Even if I email something, I want them to email me back and say, yes, I received your proposal. You delivered it on time. And then if anything comes up, you've got that email receipt. Again, there's nothing worse, especially as a small business. You don't have that much time. You don't have time to waste. You're and the money. And so if you do something you're non-compliant, it's just that waste of time there for you. And so make sure that you get it there on time. Do not be late. One of the other points about calling is setting up rapport with the contracting officer. I'm all about rapport and being a known quantity to a contracting officer. Because there's many benefits to that. One is, if they become familiar with you and there's something that comes out that you hadn't heard of, maybe they'll say, hey, we've got this that you might want to consider bidding on this. Or people in general, like Jeff Gitomer is one of my favorite sales authors. And what he says is, all things being equal, people want to do business with their friends. All things not being equal, people still want to do business with their friends, which is why I'm all about the rapport and establishing relationships with people throughout the whole proposal process. And so we're actually going a little bit faster than what I thought. So we're up to the summary already. So hopefully you guys have some good questions, or we can go back and review something if I went a little bit quick over something. But from a 3 key steps, so boiling it down again, the key steps are you want to start it right, start it on time. As soon as the RFP comes out, hit it running. And that includes reading all the documentation, as painful as that is, asking questions about the documentation or anything you don't understand, doing a bid, no bid, deciding that you're going to bid this or not bid this. You're a small business. You don't have time to waste bidding things that you're not going to win. And then develop a schedule and know what you're in for as you're doing it. Design your response, outlines, do it exactly in the format that the contracting officer wants it. If DES wants it in a certain way, and each proposal is different, each contracting office is a little bit different, but use their format. Bullet your responses first. Don't just start writing. Don't copy and paste. I've copy and pasted and sent in a different customer's name in there because I copy and pasted something in. Don't do that. Write your detailed sections. Promote with facts, benefits. What's the so what for your customer? What's the so what for DES when you're doing that? And then plan your delivery. Review everything. Verify your response against the proposal instructions. And above all else, be on time. There's nothing worse than spending all that time and not being on time for your proposal. And so a couple of final thoughts here. So proposal writing is very hard. And oftentimes you have to learn through issues, mistakes, things that don't go the best. And so don't beat yourself up about those. After you finish the proposal, first of all, go out and celebrate. Have your favorite beverage. Celebrate the fact that you just got a really big proposal delivered. And then spend some time and think about what went well, what went poorly, what can you do better next time? There's always something you can do better next time. And if you lose, well, if you lose or if you win, always, always, always ask for a debrief. Understand why you won and why you lost. This is critical. I don't feel enough people do the ask for a debrief. And I believe it's 3 days. Well, it's 3 days for federal government for the items that I've seen here. For the Washington procurement rules, it is within 3 days. And if you're going to protest a particular effort or a particular proposal, you had to have asked for a debrief. So if you don't ask for a debrief, then you waive your right to protest if you so choose. When you do a debrief, write down everything that's said. I have a couple people there, write down, document everything that's said. It's very important. The obligation is on, as you ask questions you go through, the obligation is on the contracting officer to not answer questions. And what I mean by this is ask whatever question you want, be ethical, be above board with your questions, but feel free to ask more. I will ask my competitors' prices. What were my competitors' prices? Where was I in the range? And it's not to put them in a bad situation. But you can get more information. Maybe you find out that you're at the high end of the price or the middle end of the price, or you're, 4 of 5 for highest price. That helps you with your next proposal. So ask those questions, ask open-ended questions. Don't ask just yes or no questions here. You really want to, what did you like about our technical approach? And some debriefs will just be the contracting officer, and other debriefs that maybe will have some engineers or the program manager or field engineers or somebody else on there who evaluated it. And you want to ask those folks the good questions, the deep questions about why you didn't win or why you did win. Maybe it really came down to price and you don't have as good of a technical offering as you thought. That's important to know too, because you might not win the next one. Or maybe there's a weakness that will set yourself up for somebody else to come in and win your business too, win it away from you. And so ask questions, brainstorm what questions you want to ask ahead of time before you get into your debrief. Ranges or ballparks, ask that, can you give me a ballpark? Don't take no as an answer right away, but don't be annoying about it. Don't overly push. Again, be ethical, be above board with what your questions are. If you're in person, watch for body language. I'm very big on that. If you ask a question and they lean back and fold their arms, there's something else to it. And while you might not get the answer from them, you now know there's something else that you have to work on because of the either the tone or the body language. It's hard. Writing a proposal is really easy. Anybody can sit down and write a proposal. writing a compelling and a winning proposal is very hard. It's not easy. Don't give up. Keep trying, keep working at it. There's always something better that you can do and improve. We all can. I can, everybody can. If you don't win something, apply to the next one. Don't give up. The Canadian job, like that one, like I said, we lost that. We were non-compliant on that first $80 million one, but we took all those lessons learned and we won the next one handily. I talked to my competitor at a trade show, and she was floored that she's like, "There's no way we thought you would have won that one. There's no way." And she said, "You came in and just swooped right away. We were really surprised." And so that's the kind that I want to hear that you all are able to do, is that you can take these lessons and then have these great experiences with getting better and learning from your mistakes and not being discouraged by going through a losing process. Ask, debrief, improve. And so we're done just a little bit early. Questions or comments, or is there a section you want me to go back and talk about some more?
I'd like to throw a couple things out if I could. 2 comments and a question, if that's all right.
Sure. Certainly.
Comment number 1 is that I was writing a proposal for, I can't remember who it was, but they required that a certain percent of solicitations, or that the work be solicited to historically Black colleges. And they had a formatting requirement in how you cited those. And it was like being in college citing your MLA stuff. And I don't remember if it was in the FARs or if it was in the proposal, but it's that kind of little thing where you didn't even think about it. And we had the whole bid proposal written up and it was all good to go. And on that last double check, you're like, did we cite those the way they want? And you dug into it and then it turns out, oh, we're 5 extra pages. And you got to go back and shrink it. So that attention to detail is incredibly important. My question is, have you found a format for the graphs that you're including? Typically, a lot of folks in certain industries like their pie charts. Some of them want to have a lot of lines that go up and do straight lines. A lot of guys want bars. Have you found particular formats that work with state versus federal? Is there any particular guideline you can suggest there?
That's a really good question. And I find that it varies not by state or federal, but by contracting office, is that each different group wants it a different way. And so, no. So there's the short answer to that is no. What I would do is ask. Again, this is about that rapport with the contracting officer. If upfront, so you're reviewing the documentation upfront, and they say they want these graphs. I prefer to use like either Excel for my graphs or do them in PowerPoint and copy them. And PowerPoint is awesome for doing very simple graphics very quickly. And so reach out to the contracting officer, ask the question. So, and again, I would do a yes or no. Is it acceptable if we do these graphs in Excel? If not, do you have a format that you would rather see it in? And then, so you've got the yes, no. And so if they say no, then they'll tell you what kind of a format they want to see. But Excel is so flexible for graphs and charts and things like that.
That's what I use most of the time. My other comment was a simple one, that I noticed that your presentation here also has a nice interrupted flow of text and then graphics and then text and then graphics. And you applied it perfectly here as an example for us to use. Thank you.
100% true. Yes. I have a longer version of this that I do. And that's what I say is, like, you break it up and you can see that you will see in the slides that I don't have a picture. I say you will now notice which ones I don't have a picture because of that. And again, it's bullet points count, like a bulleted list counts. And if you look at any document that has just text, and your eyes will go right to that bulleted list. And so that totally counts as an item.
Well, thank you, Matthew. I have a couple things to consider in regards to putting together a proposal. This really aligns with so many things regarding government. You know, like you want to get registered to do government contracting with the federal government. Well, if you've ever filled out your sam.gov profile, they ask a lot of questions. And realistically, you, the small business person, is the only one who has the answers. And, it's the same thing for, I don't know, applying to college. Your parents can help you, but realistically, you're the one that has to fill out everything and decide, what your major is going to be, and, the importance of filling out information correctly is critical. And, so even on these proposals, sure, you could hire somebody to write the proposal, but the reality is they are going to be asking you all the pertinent questions. So you cannot even escape that. If you're looking to get a GSA schedule, you can hire somebody, but you still have to put together all of the data for the information on it. And, so be it School of Hard Knocks or whatever, you can get guidance and help, particularly by, somebody like you, but, you don't get to be scot-free thinking, well, I'll just let them fill all this out, when the reality is they cannot move forward without, extracting everything they need from the small business owner.
That is 100% true. What I've found is that when I do this, if I go and help somebody else, the thing that I do best is all these high level pieces, but then the client will actually do the bullet points. I will just help them the bullet points or help them with the writing, but I don't put the, as you said, I don't do the meat of it. They have to do that, and then I help make it all be one voice, or help, ask the so what question all the time. I worked with one group, and they engineers, they wrote up their section on it. Was a testing section, and the first piece was everything they couldn't do. Well, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this, and I said to the guy, I'm like, Gene, this is pretty negative. You should really think about rewriting it. So he did, and he added in more things he couldn't do. He said, well, I know that they kind of want to do this. I'm like, all right, Gene, stop. Tell me what you can do. Let's talk. We said, well, we can't do this stuff. Like, Gene, stop. And then once we had this dialogue, then he got to the point of, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, let's rewrite this section. And we had to rewrite it as active voice versus passive. So because I am an engineer, I can pick on engineers. They teach you in college to write passive voice, not use names, not use that. Write it active voice. We are going to say your client's name, your customer's name, make it more of a dialogue that way, but use the customer's name more than your name, but make it more of an engaging discussion when you write to them. It's okay to scare them a little bit too, and say, these are all the things that could go wrong, but fortunately you're going to hire us because this is why they won't go wrong, and we're going to address all of those things. Nothing wrong with that.
So, along with that, your presentation gives validity to your experience and your business. But so often small businesses get scammed by these fly-by-night shapeshifters that all they really want to do is take your money. So going back to sam.gov, everything on sam.gov, everything with the federal government is free of charge. So, these poor small businesses, think, well, this is way too hard. And then, they get a phone call from, flybynight.com that will do their SAM for them for what, $2,000? And, the reality is PTAC will guide and instruct and educate the small businesses for $0. And, the same thing on GSA schedules. We can get you on your GSA schedule, only cost you $15,000. And, but again, it's the same problem, where they really need to do their due diligence moving forward and find credible resources that can guide them. and, the service that MassPoint provides. Yeah, I've actually sat in on some of your sessions with Snohomish County. And it really is an eye opener to get the full exposure of, the sessions that you do. It's what, a 2-day workshop that you do?
Yes.
And again, the PTAC offers your services in these classes free of charge. So, it's just a word to the wise that some things that seem too good to be true, they're not true. So you just have to know your very best resources and how to connect with the right connections down the road. So and I know, there's so much more to this. And, when you start dissecting the whole process, you really get into the minutia of step by step by step. And if you've ever put together, any kind of proposal, I think everyone here is familiar with the tedium that comes with it. And, if you're a small business owner, it's really good to have an asset on the side that you can bounce this off of. So anyway, always phenomenal presentation by you. Great job. And we'll see if there's any more questions or comments.
Leslie, can you hear me okay? This is Tina Boyd.
Yes.
Matthew, great presentation. I just wanted to make a comment about what you said about the debriefs. I work in the diversity and contracting department, and I'm really amazed on how many people don't ask for debriefs. In the past, I've been in this program for about 18 years, and I would say in the last 5 years, it's individuals are not asking for the debrief, so why they didn't get the proposal or bid. But the last 2 years, of course, of COVID, but you should do that. And I understand if you don't want to go in there by yourselves, but you can always ask one of somebody in my department, me and our director, myself, or Lawrence Coleman, the WIMBY manager, will go along with you. Of course, we want to know the situation and talk to you beforehand. But Matthew also mentioned something interesting too. This is the first time I've heard of that, or even have a debrief of why you won the proposal. That was interesting to me too, but I think that's good advice also. And so I just wanted to mention that we want more debriefs, and I think that's necessary, and that's how you develop and grow and improve for the next time. Okay, thanks.
Excellent, excellent.
Thanks, Tina. Okay, last call. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Mr. Miller? So I think that's it, Matthew. It was such a great refresher. And like Andrew mentioned, I'm kind of a left brain person. Well, I'm not I am a left brain person. So I truly appreciate bullet points and rows and columns. And if I were reading any kind of submitted proposals, it would be to everyone's advantage, sending anything to me to be more linear, because doing the paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, my mind is jumping, looking for the keywords and, the other aspects of the proposal. So with that, we have Aisha actually posted her email address on here. Andrew posted the link to your presentation, which has your contact information on it. And And so if there's anything that anyone else needs, connect with PTAC. Or, if you want to talk to Tina Boyd or Lawrence Coleman from the Port of Seattle, they are a wealth of knowledge. So I guess with that, we'll call it a day, if that's okay with everybody else. So I would like to thank the Port of Seattle and Tina for being here today to engage in this conversation. And also like to thank Aisha Kadri from SBTRC. She's a little bit under the weather, so I'm not going to make her talk, but she can type in the chat if you want to type something to her real quick. But other than that, we'll call it a day. And thank you, Matthew. We really appreciate you participating, and you're an ace in the hole that I'm going to keep your contact information for future events. So thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who attended today.